Hi there, everyone. My name is Alan Benjamin, and I work as a consultant for CLCA and Cornell Lens Corporation in New Zealand. I have been asked by OSO to present a discussion on the Brighten series of lenses for orthokeratology. During these exceptionally unusual times of the COVID-19 lockdown, many practitioners have a lot of free time on their hands and are keen to learn more about different products. So let's start talking about the Brighten Optix series of lenses. The Brighten Optix lens is an ortho-K lens developed by one of the largest specialty contact lens manufacturers in Asia. It has been specifically designed to fit the Asian eye, but also works very well in the Caucasian eye. The ortho-K family includes the ortho-K Direct, the ortho-K lens, and the ortho-K toric lens. When you look at the ortho-K Direct lens, this is used for those straightforward, uncomplicated cases. It's those FDA-approved cases for refractive errors under about 4 diopters with a small degree of astigmatism and a standard HVID. You should be able to fit about 80% of your patients with the ortho-K Direct lens. The ortho-K lens is more of a customized design. This is indicated for patients with specific non-standard prescriptions with higher degrees of myopia and higher degrees of astigmatism, or if there is something unusual about the cornea, for example, a flatter cornea or a larger HVID, or in cases where you may want to modify the edge profile. With the ortho-K toric, this is obviously the lens of choice when dealing with astigmatic corneas, and we will go through these designs in more detail shortly. So now let's look at the design of the Brighten lens. Like any ortho-K lens, you have these specific zones that you need to be familiar with. You have the central treatment zone. This is the back optic zone radius. You have the return zone, or the reverse curve, which is the dark green area of fluorescein. Next is the alignment zone, and then finally you have the edge. So let's look at each section in more detail so that it gives you a good understanding of what to look for when assessing an ortho-K lens. Now this slide gives us a much better visualization of what an ortho-K lens should look like on the eye. So you have your base curve, your back optic zone radius, or your treatment zone. Now, there is a reason we are moving away from the term back optic zone radius and moving towards the term treatment zone. And that is because there are many practitioners that are GP fitters, and from their point of view, the back optic zone radius is the parameter that you modify to change the fit. But this, however, is not actually true for ortho-K. There is obviously another zone you need to modify to adjust or to improve the fit. So the ortho-K community moved away from using the term back optic zone radius just to deconnect that association. So just remember that when I use the term treatment zone, it is the same thing as the base curve or the back optic zone radius, but it relates to ortho-K lenses. Now the treatment zone is generally flatter than the radius of curvature of the cornea because we want to reshape the cornea, and make it flatter in order to reduce the degree of myopia. Then we have the return curve, the reverse curve, the sigmoidal curve, or the Z zone. Its main function is that it takes the back optic zone radius that is not in alignment with the cornea, and it basically brings the lens back to the cornea so it can line up. And that helps to stabilize the lens. Then we have the alignment curve. This plays a major role in lens centration. And in the Brighten lens, if the lens diameter is smaller than 10.6 millimeters, there is one alignment curve. And if the lens diameter is greater than 10.6 millimeters, there are two alignment curves. And the second alignment curve flattens off a little more. And this is because as the cornea gets larger, it flattens out more, so you need a slightly flatter curve. And then finally, we have the peripheral curve. And this is important for lens removal and for tear exchange. And you basically just want it to lift up slightly, just like you find at the end of a ski. So if we look at the Ortho-K Direct, it includes a diagnostic or an inventory set, and it's for those uncomplicated cases. And you should be able to actually dispense the lens in office. You basically need to do three things. You need to have your target power, which is essentially your best corrected spectacle prescription. Also just note that don't over minus your patient, as this certainly can complicate things down the track. You need to note the flat K reading from your topographer. And finally, you need the HVID, which relates to your lens diameter. Most eyes will generally be between an 11.6 and an 11.8 millimeters. Most Asian eyes are roughly 11.6 mils, whereas most Caucasian eyes are about an 11.8 mils. So the Brighten Direct lens is made for the standard HVID size. As I said, the 11.6 to 11.8 millimeters. Now, calculating the treatment zone is very simple. You don't actually have to calculate this. It is as it's done for you. But if you want to know the math behind the calculation, you take the flat K in diopters, subtract your target power in diopters, and you subtract this extra minus 0.75 diopters. The so-called Jessen factor or compression factor. You can call it a fudge factor. It's that extra oomph we need in order to get the cornea to flatten to the degree that we have targeted. So that is actually why any minus correction will result in a plus BVD, or back vertex distance. So if you measure that lens in air, it will have a positive power. And that positive power on the lens is obviously to neutralize the extra minus we put into the calculation. Otherwise, your patient will not have very good vision with the lens on eye. Now, very importantly, the treatment zone does not control the lens fit. It does not determine how centered the lens will be on the eye. So please do not adjust the back optic zone radius if you want to adjust the fit of the lens on the eye. It does, however, control the power. That is, it's responsible for the amount of refractive change. So the flatter we go, the more minus we're going to correct. And the steeper we go, the less minus we'll correct. Now this is just purely a schematic representation. You'll notice that if we go flatter on the back optic zone radius, this is essentially what happens underneath the lens. you will note that it doesn't change the actual fitting relationship. It is just the radius of curvature that is flatter. And the same is true when we go steeper. The slack, or the difference, is taken up by the reverse curve. By changing the back optic zone radius, you do not change the overall fitting relationship of the lens. The alignment curve is what it's all about. Now, with the Brighten lens, for you as the fitter, the focus is all about the alignment curve. So if you go slightly flatter on the alignment curve, the lens is going to fit a little bit looser. And if you go slightly steeper on the alignment curve, the lens is going to fit a little bit steeper. Just a simple way of thinking about this is to consider the analogy of wearing a hat on your head. If the hat is too large or too flat, the hat will sink down deeper and it will touch the top of your head. If we go with a smaller, tighter hat, it will sit higher on your head and you'll have a lot more space above your head. So we need to aim to get the right relationship between the alignment curve and with the cornea. And this is just a way to think about the flat K and the alignment curve value. The idea is to fit the lens on flat K. But as you know, there can be some differences in measurements between different topographers. The Medmont and the Oculus topographers do give slightly different readings on the same cornea. So there is obviously an element of professional judgment where we need you to assess the fluorescein pattern to ensure that you have the optimum fit. In other words, have you got the correct hat size? Or do you need to go a little flatter or a little steeper? So if we go flatter, we are just changing the fitting relationship of the alignment curve to the cornea. The same is also true when you go tighter. Now, if we go back, this slide is on alignment. This is flatter. And this shows it being tighter. So that is all that is changing. The relationship between the alignment curve in blue and the cornea. In other words, it's either steepening it or tightening it. The lens diameter is very, very simple. Excuse me. It's your HVID minus 1 millimeter. So whatever your HVID measurement is, you basically deduct 1 millimeter, and this provides the overall lens diameter. Now, because the Ortho K Direct works with the trial fitting set, 80% of your cases will likely have an HVID that is between 11.6 and 11.8 millimeters. In these cases, the lens diameter that you fit will either be the 10.6 or the 10.8 millimeters, respectively. And if you move out of this range, you will then need to use the custom design, which is the Ortho K lens. You then want to assess the peripheral curve of the lens. You want a nice bright green ring all the way around the lens. This is a good sign that the edge is lifting off and you have good tear exchange occurring. The width is 0.4 millimeters and the standard edge radius is 12 millimeters. This can actually be increased, i.e. you can go flatter up to 13 millimeters if the lens is too tight, or reduced. In other words, go steeper down to 11 millimeters if it is too loose. It's always better to go a little bit looser than too tight. If it is too tight, the lens will suction on the eye, and these lenses will obviously be difficult to remove, and you then find staining, etc. Now, this is the diagnostic fitting set. Please note that it only has one power vertically and one diameter horizontally. These sets are available in 10.6 and 10.8 millimeters. So the purpose of this fitting set is to figure out the correct AC value. Once again, you need to figure out the correct head size. So I will take my values and I will pick the lens that is closest to the flat K. Note that there are back optic zone radius values here too, but these really are of no importance to you in the fitting process. The only reason that they are there is so that you can verify that you have received the correct lens. If you verify this on a radius scope and you have, for example, a 43 alignment value, the base curve radius should be 8.82 millimeters. Then you know that you have the correct lens. Otherwise, as I said, please ignore this value. So let's see how the system works. We use our flat K at 3 millimeters, which is essentially the SIM-K flat value. In this case, it is 43.57 diopters. We look at the value which is closest to that, which is 43.5 diopters, and the HVID matched up at 10.6 mils. So now we are going to use our fitting set and take the lens marked with 43.50 diopters and place it on the eye. You then let the lens settle for 10 to 15 minutes. Preferably get the patient to sit with their eyes closed, just sort of similar to the condition that the lens will be on the eye at night. And then we assess the fit. As with most GP lenses, with the blink, you would expect plus or minus 1 millimeter of movement. Looking at the treatment zone, you want a well-demarcated area. It's a dark area. Just remember that it is not touch, but it indicates that the fluorescein layer is less than about 20 microns. You then look at the reverse curve and then the wide alignment curve. We are looking for a good demarcation from reverse curve to the alignment curve and to the edge. And you really want to see the clear rings starting to develop. There is a 3 to 6 to 1 ratio to look for between the return zone, alignment curve, and the edge. It is fluorescein based, which implies that the more you do, the better you become. So there is a bit of a learning curve, but it is not a very complicated one. So if we look at these fits, if you look at the diagram on the left, you'll notice some bleeding of the fluorescein. In other words, just some seeping underneath that alignment curve. And this tells me that my hat is basically too flat. That means that my alignment curve is too flat and I need to tighten the alignment curve value. Looking at the diagram on the right, well, here the opposite is true. My hat is too tight and it's actually sitting too far away from my head, and I'm getting a lot more pooling in the actual center. So over here you need to loosen the alignment curve so that the hat can actually drop so that we can achieve a proper ratio with a good central treatment zone. So really stressing this point about the alignment curve, as this is what the fit is all about. When the lens looks too flat, we want to steepen the alignment curve and you want to bring that alignment curve in. If we find that it's too tight, we want to loosen it. So how do we do that? You know, if the 43.50 diopter lens was fitted on the eye, we will now select a lens that is a little flatter in the alignment curve. We will take that lens out of the fitting set, insert it into the eye, let it settle, and then do the fluorescein evaluation. And if it now looks correct, then we know that it's the correct head size. That is the correct alignment curve value that we want to use for this patient. So now that we've determined that, we now need to calculate the treatment power. Very simply, with the lens on eye, we perform a refraction over the lens. So we either add or subtract our over-refraction from the power of our trial lens. This will give us our final lens power. In this case, our trial was a -4 diopters, and let's say we found a +1 diopter refraction over the lens. The final lens power is going to be -3 diopters. And we can now look on the vertical column for the -3 diopters. On our horizontal column, look for the 43 diopters, and the back optic zone radius, we can see, will be 8.6 millimeters. And this is the lens we will dispense from the inventory set, and the patient will take that lens home. If you do not have the inventory set, you can still use your diagnostic set. So if you're a little unsure of the fluorescein pattern, you can send your patient home for overnight lens wear. You know, we are not interested in how well they're going to see with that lens, but what we want to see is the start of you achieving a bullseye pattern when the patient returns. So check the topography map. It may well not be perfectly developed, but we want to see that it is centralized. And you also want to ensure that the cornea is clear with no staining. Explain to your patient that we are more concerned about the centration of the lens and not really concerning ourselves at this stage with how well they can see. So that really is just another way of using the diagnostic set. I would just like to talk a little bit about, at this stage, the refraction over the lens. Now, really important to do your refraction over lens on any ortho-K lens that you dispense. And there's obviously a very good reason for this. Firstly, it double checks that the target power is correct. You know, in other words, have we done the correct calculation? Secondly, let's imagine that you fitted a patient, you did a refraction over lens, and in this case, let's say you found that it was plano. Your patient has worn the lenses for, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks now, and they return and you find that they have a plano result still. Well, this is really the perfect outcome. Now, 2 years down the track, your patient returns, and you now get an over-refraction with no lens on the eye of -1 diopters. So the question here is why? Is this because the lens is no longer molding on the eye anymore, because it may be distorted, or has your patient progressed by an additional -1 diopters? How do you determine this now? Well, you do an over-refraction above the lens. And if your refraction over lens shows -1 diopters, this means that there has been a progression of 1 diopter. You don't need to do a washout. You can simply use your original topography map, apply the new target power, which is the old spectacle prescription, plus the refraction over lens, and you can now calculate the new lens parameters. If you don't have the refraction over lens on the day of dispensing, you do not know if this is due to a progression or a lens that is no longer doing its job. Well, then you have to do a full washout to determine what the new refraction is and wait for the cornea to reach baseline, which, as you may well know, can take up to 8 or 10 or 12 weeks in some cases. And if the eye is not washed out completely, it becomes an absolute nightmare when it comes to troubleshooting down the track. So that refraction over lens on the day of dispensing is worth its weight in gold. Right, back to Brighten. Well, sometimes we find that the cornea falls out of this 80% group. You know, it's one of those 20% group. Actually, the ones that often sort of keep you busy 80% of the time. You then switch over to the OrthoK design, which is the custom order. So here we still need the same information. We need the subjective refraction for the target power. We need the SIMK values, and we need the HVID. The difference is that in this case, you need to use the spreadsheet or the lens calculator. It's really very simple. All you have to do is complete the table. You enter the SIMK values, your spectacle prescription, and enter your target power, which is your spherical equivalent. And just obviously bear in mind that this design is not for high astigmatic corrections. This is where the astigmatism is sort of less than about 1.5 diopters of spectacle astigmatism. And finally, you enter the HVID. The calculator will then do the work and will provide the information for the lab to manufacture the required lens. So all we need is this completed spreadsheet. We will then email this to Brighten, and they will then customize the lens design for you based on the information. Keep in mind with the system that because we are not verifying the fit with your diagnostic lens, you know, your capturing of maps is very important, and accuracy of maps is where it is at. You know, 80% of our troubleshoots are related to poor map capture. Yes, it certainly is an art taking a good map. You know, we often find that many practitioners spend, 3 or 4 minutes capturing a map and then 30 minutes refining the prescription and doing other tests. I often just say to practitioners, and I recommend that they spend at least sort of 15 to 20 minutes with map capture until they have mastered the art, just so that they can ensure that the map is geometrically centered and that you have full corneal coverage with no ring jam. You know, you want to make sure that the maps are repeatable and reliable. And, this certainly will increase the likelihood of a successful outcome. If you're working with a map that is not accurate, you're going to spend far more time trying to troubleshoot. And, you'll often need 3 or 4 lenses to achieve a good result, compared to great success in fitting a lens with confidence when all decisions are based on accurate maps. So again, the same story. When you assess the lens, which has been optimized for the cornea, you want to see the same picture as we discussed earlier. If the lens does not look great, to be able to help you with troubleshooting, it is exceptionally helpful if you can supply images, good photos. I want to really be able to see the entire lens on the eye when it's centered. And obviously the better the photo, the less we have to guess. And even a video can be exceptionally helpful. Sometimes a detailed explanation of what you're observing helps a lot if you're not able to include a good photo. And obviously including the pre and post maps is very, very important. Again, the idea is if the lens is too tight, we will loosen the alignment curve. And if the lens is too flat, we'll steepen the alignment curve. Also, just remember that we do not need to make too much of a change to the alignment curve, as this obviously does affect centration. So you want to just make small changes to the alignment curve at a time. As I said earlier, with this lens, we can customize the lens diameter. So with unusually small or unusually large HVIDs, you want to look at the OrthoK system and not the OrthoK direct system. Always remember that a lens fitted too small has a tendency to decenter. So you need to ensure you're working with the lens with the correct diameter. And finally, the last lens in the system is the OrthoK toric. As the name implies, you will use this design when there is toricity on the cornea. Two rules of thumb here. If your spectacle prescription is greater than 1.5 diopters of SIL, or if you measure your delta K at 7 mils and your difference in corneal astigmatism is greater than 0.75 diopters at that point, then you want to switch over to the toric design. So what makes it different? The lens still has a spherical optic zone. The difference is that the reverse curve and the alignment curve are toric. So it has different angles for the different principal meridians, and this will result in better alignment of the lens in that astigmatic cornea. So we have to differentiate the type of astigmatism too. As you all know, we get our central astigmatism. This astigmatism is more central. In other words, it ends sort of halfway across the cornea, and it becomes more spherical as you move towards the periphery. In other words, it's sort of isolated more centrally and within that sort of mid-peripheral area of the cornea. The way to check for this on your topographer is to go and look at the 7mm chord, and your delta K should be fairly spherical. It will be less than 0.75 diopters. So if your spectacle prescription has a small degree of SIL and the delta K at 7 mils is less than 0.75, you can still use the spherical design. Now, when you have your limbus to limbus astigmatism and you look at the 7mm chord, you'll notice that there is more astigmatism present. And as I said, if that value is greater than 0.75 diopters, you will then switch over to the toric design. You can see it's not too complicated. So first determine what cornea you're dealing with, as this guides you as to whether you'll use the spherical or the toric system. And simply remember that if the delta K at 7 mils is greater than 0.75 diopters, you go with the OrthoK toric. And as with recording your values from OrthoK design, you determine your refraction for the target power, the flat K at 3 mils, the delta K at 7 mils, and the HVID. We go back to the calculator. Once again, you enter your sim Ks at 3 mils, enter the sim Ks at 7 mils, record the delta K at 7 mils, add in your spectacle prescription and your target power, and finally the HVID. Once you have done this, the software calculates the toric design for you. Copy and paste this into an email and send it to us, and your order is complete. From that point, we'll send you a lens that is customized for the toricity. You put it onto the eye and you check the fluorescein pattern. Now, the photo on the left-hand side, if your toricity is out, you'll notice generally good alignment in one meridian, usually the flat meridian. Generally, in the steep meridian, you will find some fluorescein bleeding. That means that you do not have enough toricity in that meridian. You then need to decide how much tighter you need to go in that meridian. Once you've done a few cases, you will gain the experience to determine sort of how much of a change is required. The middle photograph is that if you have good alignment, the lens will align just like a spherical lens. And the photo on the right-hand side, if you've included too much toricity, you'll find actually that the opposite sort of occurs. You'll generally find that there'll be pooling in the flatter meridian, and the central sag will typically lift off or be rather excessive. So finally, when placing your order for your toric lens, you can either use your inventory set, which means you can dispense on the same day. Yeah, great for those patients who want everything now. And if it's more complicated, you can go with the empirical fitting using the calculator. All we need is the spectacle prescription, flat K value, if there is toricity, and the HVID. From there, we can design the lens for you. And that should get you on your way to a really successful fit. That concludes the discussion on the Brighten lens. I thank you very much for your attention and wish you